This is the topic of the next presentation by Dr. Sangita Menon, who is the Professor of Head of the NIA's Consciousness Studies Program in the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore. Welcome, Dr. Menon.
Namaste and good evening. I think I am the last person standing here between you and perhaps a delicious dinner waiting outside. So I can definitely empathize with you, the pain of listening to a lecture on a very abstract topic such as consciousness. So apologies for that to begin with. And perhaps to make you a bit more awake and forget the pangs of hunger, let me start with a story. So here is this young person, young boy, taking the words of his father very seriously and ending up in the world of death to meet the Lord of Death. And he has a few questions when he reaches there. But unfortunately, the person whom he wanted is not available, and he had to wait for 2-3 days. And you know whom I'm talking about? This is Nachiketas. And when he finally meets Lord Yama, like perhaps many other people, he was tempted by the gifting of adorable, enticing objects, which Nachiketa didn't accept, and he wanted to know only one question. What exists finally? What stays back? When you and I leave this room, what happens to this room? When you and I have our dinner, retire to our hotel room, what happens to the space which we possessed a few hours back? Who is the person who moves around through the various physiological states, through various states of our awareness? Isn't it interesting that during a day of our life, take a typical day, we go through very different levels of awareness. Some of you at this point could be very alert. It could be the reason that perhaps the day is over and you can look forward to starting another day tomorrow morning. For few others, the reason could be perhaps a good meal is outside, and few others, it could be just that that's your happy nature, to be alert and to be awareful all the time. But isn't it interesting that awareness plays a great role in our day-to-day life, that we have the ability to possess different degrees of awareness and use this awareness for various cognitive capabilities. This story of Nachiketas, which asks a very important question and which recurs throughout the traditional schools, the classical schools of Indian philosophy, that what exists? What is the nature of existence which won't be disappearing? So what is the nature of that existence? What part of me could be perhaps described as that which is truly existing? You may think that this is a philosophical question, but perhaps not. In our day-to-day life, we forget the fact that in our daily encounters, we ask this question again and again. And it is that question which gives you the value to engage in a particular action. Friends, what I want to present to you this evening is that if you look at the current trends in consciousness studies and juxtapose those with the Indian philosophical discussions on the nature of consciousness, you can see that there are 3 frameworks. One is the framework of existence. What truly exists? What is the nature of existence? And the second is once we postulate the nature of existence, how do we know it? Is it amenable to the means of knowledge or any particular ways of knowing it? And thirdly, I would think there is this persistent question of what is beyond, what lies ahead. And it is that possibility, the space of possibility, which I think is making consciousness studies in the contemporary period, and also that question which has been asked continuously again and again in the darshana tradition, makes our journey very exciting in our life. So let me try to explain to you some of these ideas which surrounds these three frameworks. How do we understand existence? Can existence be understood in the context of what exists, or should it be in the context of that which disappears after a while? And you would see various instances of this particular idea in the Upanishads and perhaps in some of the Vedic hymns. Along with this question on existence, you would also see that even if you define, let us say you define the body in certain terms, you define your mind and mental capabilities, cognitive capabilities from a certain standpoint, how do we understand the reality of it? How do you know that what you are thinking is truly happening at this space and time? Is it that which is going to stay for a while, or are you changing? Well, some of us would like to say that, well, I don't change, I'm the same old person, right? People ask this question, and then you say, no, I remain the same. Some of us would also like to say, no, I keep changing, because the thoughts which I had the other day have changed, and today I have fresh new thoughts. So change also seems to be an important part of our personality. How do we understand change and that which stays permanently in the context of our own awareness? If everything is changing or everything is permanent, how is our awareness holding this? Smriti or memory is an extremely important concept in Indian philosophical systems, and the various traditions, Buddhism, Nyaya, Sankhya, they take it extremely very different ways. But the idea of retention and the power to retain is an exciting topic in Indian philosophical tradition. And that is the case in the contemporary dialogues on consciousness studies. Well, a serious contender in consciousness studies, and as perhaps believed by many scholars and neurophysiologists and neuroscientists, is that consciousness actually can be found in certain correlates. And these correlates are correlates which represent certain parts of your brain or certain neurochemical functions of your brain. So basically, consciousness is a certain region of your brain or a function which is expressed by your brain. Well, this is one of the mainstream view that brain explains consciousness. It either gives rise to consciousness or it is a representation of consciousness. So one of the theory that the brain is a good cartographer is an extremely interesting theory, that the brain continuously maps our experiences and it helps you to remember, have feedback, and also perhaps change our behavior accordingly. But one question perhaps which is not raised enough is that what helps the brain to continuously learn from our experiences? Is there a notion of self which is missing in brain sciences today? I would think so. And that is where I think the important contribution of Indian philosophy, and when I say Indian philosophy, I include the Shaddarshanas here, comes. The idea of the person. And today we live in a world where the person, you and me, in flesh and blood, with emotions, with our insecurities, with our fears, love, joy, etc., becomes very important. The person who is made of the body, the mind, and our emotions. Such a person, you would think, that is absent when you look at the cognitive sciences and consciousness studies in contemporary world. Well, I may not be completely right, because in the last 10 years, you would see that a sudden change has happened, and this change has happened with the help of neuropsychiatry and neuropsychology. Earlier, ailments to mind, challenges to mind, like schizophrenia or many other dysfunctions of your self-perception, which happens because of traumatic injuries to your brain, have been recorded in a very clinical fashion. You document in a very medical fashion. But today that is changing. You want to hear the story of a schizophrenic, how he or she explains her world of experience. What is her world of experience to her in her own words? This is called as the first-person approach. The first-person approach has today become a great contender in equal terms to debate with the so-called scientific positions, which considers your experience and my experience as third-person data. So here, the dialogue today is between data, which you compile based on technologies, and the self or the subject, which is you and me, which is composed of experiences. So interestingly, friends, you see that the exciting event that is happening in the understanding of consciousness, cognition, and other related entities is that there is a dialogue. And why is this dialogue happening? This dialogue is happening because we are interested to have a method which is organic, which is not binary, which is not Baconian, which is not Cartesian, which divides mind and body, but definitely there's a discriminating understanding of the mind, body, and perhaps something beyond. But what is that which connects all this? Our mind, body, and the space beyond it. And that is where the idea of the self, the person, the subject, comes very important. So you would see that the discussions on self, or the first-person approach, has taken a big chunk of space in the literature on consciousness studies. Even people writing on brain, writing about the subject of the synaptic experience. So however much we explain our experiences in terms of synapses, we have to also finally conclude that here is a person who finally undergoes emotions, experiences, and so on. And therefore, one of the idea which is again, I think, parallel you would see in Indian philosophical traditions and the current neuropsychiatric, neuropsychological discussion is the importance of seeing a space which is beyond, which we in our ordinary language call as hope. You and I live so happily and live so fearlessly because we have the greatest gift of hoping for a better tomorrow, of a better, perhaps a next hour. So the hope for the future is the greatest gift of the space of consciousness. And it is that space which allows us to transform ourselves, build values, and abide by those values, and explore our own self to perhaps discover the space which is beyond. And this space which is beyond is extremely important when it comes to people with challenged awareness, challenged consciousness, which I wouldn't go into details. But you can imagine that there is another world where people have great difficulties in having a continuous sense of self-awareness, continuous sense of a feeling of how much of your body would sit in a particular seat, or how much space you require, which is technically called as proprioception. But all these ideas are coming together because of a methodology which is experiential and first person. And I would think that this is the greatest contribution of Indian philosophical tradition. However much epistemological or knowledge-oriented questions we ask, finally we come to the importance of the individual, the person, who is inquiring into it, and what qualities or what aptitude that person need to know or need to experience to see something beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you so